Build for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, God tells to Moses. God says these words at an interesting time. The Israelites are on their way out of Egypt. We have come down and away from Mount Sinai. And we know from our history, our ancestors did, that there were temples. There were temples in Egypt to the various gods, places in which people would go to make an offering, to make worship, to make a sacrifice. But God, like in so many other ways, God takes the practices of the ancient Near Eastern world and turns them on their head in delivering them to us. Other peoples had multiple temples to multiple gods that were permanent fixed structures. Our God, the unified God, the only God, instead asks us to build a portable, a temporary structure that we could construct and strike as we needed to as we made our way throughout the wandering through the desert. And when God asked us to build this and challenged us with the idea that God would dwell among us, when we did, it felt somewhat audacious as an undertaking for us. How could we, mere mortals, build a place that God could dwell? We are earthly. We are finite. God is divine. God is infinite. How could we possibly fulfill this instruction in a way that would meet to its end, that God would come and be among us? Now, the rabbis answer this question with an idea that may be familiar to some of us, the idea of tzimtzum, mitzamsem, that God would contract God's self to fit into that infinite space. We often think of this word tzimtzum in a very different way, in the Kabbalistic way, that God contracted God's self to make room for the finite world at the beginning of creation. But the rabbis saw it differently. They saw that within the finite world, God could also restrict God's self, that God might enter and be with us. And from that teaching of the rabbis, we learned that there's nowhere on earth, there isn't a space really anywhere in our universe where God couldn't go. God could arrive at any one of our doorsteps, any mountaintop, any valley, anywhere, as long as we create that space and sanctify it for God's welcome. That notion that God can be found in any sanctified mikdash, any place of prayer or worship, I can't think of a time other maybe than with the construction of the tabernacle, when this notion that God could be anywhere for worship could be more important than it is right now. For almost a full year, we have been making for God sanctuaries in our own homes, in our living rooms, in our dining rooms, in our kitchens, and maybe even in our bedrooms, which is where I sit in my home this evening, as I have for so many Shabbatot over these past few months. This idea that we are here to make the place where God ought to go gives us so much power and so much opportunity. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory taught that when God gave this instruction to the Israelites in the desert, God did it because God was trying to bring the Israelites together. It was like a team building exercise, a way to unify them. Do this for God, do it together, and you will grow up into a nation. And it's fulfilling that idea that we need to do something together right now that we have done in this past year. Each week, many of us go to a spot in our homes that is our spot where we experience service. Each week, I have to bring out the tables, I have to get the power cords, I have to get the HDMI, put everything together, the computer, the monitor, the camera, the microphone. I build in this spot in my home each week a mikdash, a holy place where I will dwell and hopefully God will join me. And each week you all have been doing the same. And we're building and we're rebuilding and we're building and rebuilding. We're building and rebuilding our lives through this pandemic. We are building and rebuilding our congregation as we thrive with virtual Bethel and everything else that we have been doing this year. And we build and rebuild our sanctuaries in our home or wherever it may be that we are experiencing the time to worship the Holy One. In this week of Shabbat Zachor, when we're supposed to remember our way through the darkness in past times, we will in the future remember this year. We'll remember this reading of Torah, this iteration of Parshat Truma, and this Shabbat Zachor when we were making our way through the darkness. But we will also remember is how we banded together to find and build holiness no matter what. Shabbat Shalom.